All systems nominal.
それでは早速全速前進
You wanna know what the weak point of a mech is? The fucking pilot.
Get away from her, you bitch!
His papers say he was a raven.
Protocol 3.
A pattern blue!
Lesbians in space. It's a topic close to all of our hearts, at least here at OSG Studios. And we thought, after our recent discussion of Heaven Will Be Mine, that we wanted to explore this topic. And to get to the core of these lesbians in space, we thought we'd go right to the source. Aevee Bee, the lead designer and co-creator of Heaven Will Be Mine, we reached out to her to interview her and get some more information on both the design that went into it and her as a creator. Aevee Bee is a narrative designer, writer, editor, and former games journalist. She's most known for her work on visual novels We Know the Devil and Heaven Will Be Mine, but also her journalism and her streaming. She's currently working with Future Club on Skrull Girls, a 2D fighting game, as well as a litany of unannounced projects. While our focus today is specifically on Heaven Will Be Mine and those kooky lesbians in space we talked about before, the context of her other works is very important to that story as well. So, as we say in the episodes, let's launch into it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. My name's Alice, and you are...
I'm Aevee Bee. I am a writer and a game developer. I feel like I can call myself that now, as I feel like
it's been a while that you've been with the studio working on Skullgirls, right?
Yeah. I've been like, what do I describe what I do? I feel like director actually is like a pretty good, that's what I really was on Heaven Will Be Mine, We Know the Devil. And it's not exactly, I'm certainly not the director of Skullgirls. I actually don't do very much work on Skullgirls, although that's probably the only work people have seen from me at that studio so far. That should not be the case forever.
Yes.
But I've been doing design and I increasingly do programming as well.
So kind of just, a few things.
A generalist. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be a generalist kind of the deeper you get in the game industry. Or at least I have chosen to do this because I want to be a better game designer.
Well, knowing the different parts that go into it, I'm sure even at a director capacity can really help.
Yeah, definitely. You want to, something that I noticed even, working with a very small team of people and so much so working with a bigger team of people is that you really need to know how all the disciplines work. There's that famous, I never get tired of quoting Ben Esposito saying that nobody told me that when you make a video game, you have to make the whole thing. And there's so much of that whole thing in video games. And if you, you might think you know what UI is, you might think you know what art is, but until you start actually working on it and working with people who make it their life's work, you really don't actually know as much as you think. So the more that you know, the better you're able to work with others. It's something you really have to do a lot of.
Right. Especially when you have to rely so heavily on not a team of people to work with, but here is the other person that I'm making this game with. And they do those disciplines that are different than mine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm talking to you today specifically about Heaven Will Be Mine, but before we get to that, there was a game before that, We Know the Devil, in the same kind of universe. Why make games? why make games? Why start there?
God, I ask myself that question all the time. I actually, when at GDC earlier this year, I gave a little talk at the One Reason to Be panel, which was kind of, what's your reason to be in video games? And I was like, oh God, why? I only really thought about it actually. And it's kind of, I make it sound like it was an accident. No, it was really purposeful. I, spent a long time as a writer. I thought working as a short story writer or a novelist or something like that, and going into academia was going to be what I was doing with my life. But I really liked video games, and I spent a lot of time writing about video games. And then I was like, man, I really wish I could make video games. Well, that will never happen. That's impossible. But I guess like the more that you like think about, well, if I was gonna make a video game, it would be like this. And the more you start like talking with other people, the more it approaches possibility. And, you know, we just kind of like had a kind of happy convergence of myself, Max, and Pillow Fight wanting to all work on that game together. And it was a very like impromptu thing, We Know the Devil, because I just kind of was like, oh, I had like a content script going around because I'm always working on something.
A real writer, always
just making it
always something in the fire.
Yeah, I'm usually like working on like something in my spare time. And I've been that way ever since I was like a kid. Like, you know, I just spent a lot of time daydreaming, and then I started writing it down because people told me that I should start writing it down. And then that became like my work as a writer. And now I have been teaching myself how to code. And so now I've been like thinking about how do I turn this image in my head into something that people can play and look at and interact with. So why I want to do that so bad, it was like actually kind of a difficult question. It's like, I wish I could say that like it's just like, I want this thing to exist so badly. I guess I'm willing to spend my whole life doing that. Maybe that's my like, my answer.
You don't have to give it an answer.
Yeah,
if there isn't one.
It's just like I just like think about it all the time. I'm like, okay, and then I should do this thing next, and then I should do this thing next. And the thought of like why I'm doing it is not really like occurring to me. Like as long as someone is paying me money, I will be doing it. And even if somebody is not paying me money, I'll probably be doing it. Background, which is like how We Know the Devil and Heaven Will Be Mine, because somebody else was paying me money and I got to do that.
You said something that kind of brings me back to this. You said that you wrote a lot about games, and you were in games journalism, an industry we know and love, and I think still technically exists.
But yeah, I was gonna say was in games journalism a thing that did exist. Well, you're like there are people like yourself who are keeping it alive, so
it's not so much a structured, you can go get a corporate job playing video games like we thought we could as kids. It's, you can kind of do a grassroots thing. But when doing games journalism, you take a very critical eye to video games. Did that give you any pause when you started tooling around with actually making them? That, you know, as somebody who's criticized, not that your writing was critical, but I mean, it was critical, but not... You know what I mean? But going from that into, you know, and now here's my baby that other people criticize.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things here. One is that like when I was learning to be a writer, I went through a very structured, like I went to college for writing, and then I also have a master's, an MFA for like nonfiction writing, actually, because I really thought I was going to be a journalist. Yeah, I was like, oh, it's completely impractical to try and be like a fiction writer. That doesn't make any sense. So
you wanted to do it, but you were realistic enough to be like...
Yeah, so I wanted to do it. I kept on like doing the thing that I felt like I was supposed to do instead of the thing that I actually wanted. And the thing that I actually wanted is what paid off. So take that advice for what it's worth. But yeah, I didn't really like, I mean, in that field, there's so much about how to take criticism. I think that's like one of the few very valuable things that like creative writing education can teach you. I wouldn't really, don't ever pay money to get an MFA. Try and get a teaching position or something if you really want to do it. But I think that like one of the best things about that experience is like really learning how to take criticism. So when I was going out there, I was like, first of all, I'm going to make what I think is good. And I will hopefully I'm right about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other half of that is like, well, I'm making something that I think is going to be good according to my own standards. And like when I worked as a critic, I tried really hard to, first of all, like talk about the actual work and how the actual work does whatever it does. Because I think if you are specific enough in the details of like how a game works, like why are the mechanics interesting? Like why is it fun or engaging, or why does it make you feel this sort of way? If you really drill down at like how it's doing those things and just like dwelling in like the result, the feelings, not that that's also fun as well, but when you really ground that in like how the work, the craft and form of how it actually works, you depersonalize it a lot, and you kind of like talk about it as like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, or this is what I think the work is accomplishing. And I might like say like, it was trying to do this and it failed and it sucks because of that, or it's trying to do this and I hate this thing that it does, you know. But I really always wanted to leave it open for the reader to be like, oh, I understand where she's coming from. I understand that reasoning because she's made her reasoning so clear. And because of that, even though she hated it, I know I would love it. Like, there's nothing better than seeing a negative review from somebody where you're like, oh, but I would actually like,
right,
you know? Like,
oh, that sounds like my shit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, because and that's only possible when somebody does that sort of job of explaining it. So like, I know, like, you know, there are people, even like peers and friends I had who like, you know, didn't necessarily like love every single thing that I did in my works. And like, I would probably say there's certainly like flaws in both of Heaven Will Be Night and We Know the Devil that I'm like, wow, those were really thorny problems that I really wish I could have solved. However, I also believe in releasing that it's better to release something flawed than like, you know, not release anything. Because now those are games that you can play. So I really wasn't that worried about it. The other thing too is like, I don't necessarily read a lot of like criticism or feedback that people write of my work, actually. I mean, I do sometimes, but I don't seek it out. I never name search. I never like look at
You're
that.
not ego searching?
Yeah, I never do that. I hate doing it. Like it stresses me, just like looking at my normal social media feed stresses me out. I can't imagine how it would feel if it was just all about me. So I do that very rarely. And often I have like other people being like, oh, I was name searching you and I saw this thing or like some other thing. And that's kind of like how I find out about stuff. Like I'll do it like once a year or something like that. I'll be like, oh yeah, what was like, or I'm like trying to, I have to like, you know, write a resume or something like that. And I'm like, oh, what do people say about it? Somebody likes this thing,
Am
right?
I acclaimed? What do I put down here?
Yeah, you know, I'm critically acclaimed, right? Let me find somebody.
I'm a critic. I'm acclaiming you. Put it on the resume. That's
right, exactly.
I don't know how that works, what qualifications I need, but I feel like I can.
Critically. Yeah, I think if I've been acclaimed, hey, the more people who are acclaiming me, the better.
But also, I'm not actively seeking it out.
Yeah, I would rather, like, what I like to obsess over a thing, make it, put it out into the world and be like, oh, thank God it's finally over. And then it's, and because then it's not my problem anymore. It's your problem. It's like, it's for critics and people to like look at and react to. And I might like take that and be like, oh, I didn't succeed at this, so I want to like try and work on this better in the next thing. But it's like, I'm really thinking about like, I don't know what I want to do.
Right. And then once it's done and you hit the publish button, there it is. Somebody else go through that and deal with it and stress over it for years.
Yeah, exactly.
My next question. Your longtime collaborator and partner in Worst Girls Games is Max Schwartz, who did the art for Heaven Will Be Mine. What's it like to collaborate with an artist to realize your vision for a game?
Yeah, so I think I'll just talk about working with artists in general here, if that's okay. But I think that like it's like really interesting to have somebody with like a really different experience than yours and who is approaching the same things that you're approaching from a different angle. And I think that like having the skill of being able to like really use the talent that you're good at, like words, to really well describe what you want to see out of what they're good at, you know? and vice versa. Like currently I work at a studio that's like full of artists. Like, like it's one of the most highly like traditional 2D driven studios. And you can get a lot out of people, but you have to be like you often have to be like really descriptive, and you have to be really clear about what you're saying. So I think that like on specifically We Know the Devil in Heaven Will Be Mine, we were kind of like just having so much fun and treating it just kind of like a little bit more like people would their OCs than they would like a professional project. And I think that was actually very healthy for it too. I feel like a lot of people who, it's not always the environment that you have, but like being able to play and have fun with it and find out what other people are excited about, because you're not like, at least in my experience, when you are working on a game with a lot of people, especially on like a small team, you might have somebody who's like driving the overall vision, and they're the person who's kind of like in the project. But there kind of has to be room for everybody to find something that they're excited about, And you tend to get a lot more out of people when you can find a way like, oh, you like drawing this, or like this is your style. Let's play to your strengths rather than like kind of expect you to do this sort of, I don't know, something that's outside of your wheelhouse. And it happened that like, at that time we were both like very aligned in like the sort of things that we were like really interested in. So I think that made for a really good collaboration there.
Yeah, that level of passion and just, I mean, who doesn't love, my OCs who are precious to me? Please don't do anything to them. So going from a story about fighting the devil at summer camp to a story about mechs breaking reality in space is a very big setting shift. What made you want to make a game about mecha girls?
Well, I love robots. Hey, robots are about bodies. I don't know if anyone has said that before, but like, yeah, actually,
I think this might be the first critical eye that's taken a look at that. But continue. We'll dive into this.
So like, it felt like a very fruitful thing. I mean, I'll be honest. I was like just watching a lot of Gundam. I was like, I like mecha stuff quite a lot.
Can we pause? Can you give me your top 3 Gundam series?
Oh my god, top 3 Gundam series
in
right
no
now.
particular order.
Okay. The good OETMS team episodes. Turn A Gundam.
Great.
And OG, obviously.
Do you have a favorite Gundam?
Oh, yes. Actually, it's it's an obscure one called the TR6 Woundwort from Advance of Zeon, which is like all of the robot names in that are named after Watership Down characters for some reason. It's like I think it was like a manga, but they have gunpla of them, and they have really weird, interesting designs. The Woundwort like doesn't have feet; it just has kind of like little pull toes on it. It's very cute, and they have like rabbit antennae. I think that's why they were like named after.
Why is this so cute?
Yeah, so that's my favorite. Yeah, it's a very obscure design, but I think it's one of my favorites.
It's so unique.
Yeah,
but also Advance of Zeon. What a pull.
Yeah. I have dived deeply into Gundam. A lot of times it's been like, wikis and like just looking stuff up.
I love reading Gundam lore. It is so convoluted at this point after 40 years of different manga and stuff.
Absolutely.
That kind of jumps to the next one, which is what mecha media, if any, helped to inspire Heaven Will Be Mine?
Well, a huge amount of it was Gundam, because it was very fresh. Like, I hadn't ever watched Gundam as like a kid, so I was really getting into it for the first time.
Oh.
Like, yeah, I actually hadn't watched any Gundam series other than like random episodes on Toonami until like a year or two before Heaven Will Be Mine came out. So I'm kind of like a fake fan a little bit, but I also like have a lot of like, I mean, I watched Eva when I was like 14.
Great time to watch it.
It was the perfect time to watch it. I've had this thing, it's like long past, but like watching it again as when I was Misato's age for my like Saturn return felt like a fun thing to do. Maybe I'll get around to it one of these days.
It's worth it to watch it at Misato's age and just be like, oh.
It's like really different perspective. Yeah, so like I mean, obviously one of the biggest elephants in the room when you're talking about like mecha stuff, especially among Western audiences, because it was so influential here. But I kind of wanted to merge some of that with like actually a lot more like literary sci-fi. So like I watched a lot of anime and a lot of mecha stuff, but like I had also read like the Ancillary Justice trilogy recently, read like Ursula K. Le Guin and some other like The Left Hand of Darkness and other big kind of like big idea sci-fi writers like Asimov, like I had read when I was like a kid. But in that kind of like I did not want to write something that was like felt like a kind of modern like singularity type stuff, because like the very like in fact, as I was like working on Heaven Will Be Mine, like SpaceX was getting really like popular, and I was like, whoa, should I even write anything at all positive about space in this kind of like nightmare capitalist world? Because it doesn't really feel good. And actually, while I was doing a lot of research, I was like, wow, not like things were better back then or anything, but there used to be a lot more like public works funding. And now everything is like privatized in this like tech dystopia sort of way, rather than like space being this kind of like idealistic dream of like humanity coming forward as one, you know, under like 70s jingoism and Cold War era paranoia, of which I tried to evoke a little bit in there as well. But there's like this prevailing idea that it like space is the idea of humanity in space is a dream that feels like it's actually already died.
Right.
And it's like kind of like the ways in which like tech culture is trying to revive a bunch of like things that we have that have kind of like turned out to be dead ends is like, it's like 80s nostalgia, but for like a different kind of future. Maybe because the future seems so bad right now. And it's hard to imagine what like a good future would be.
Right.
But like all of the things were kind of like rattling in my head. And so I was like, oh, I kind of like want to write a really personally driven story, kind of like Eva, where it's like not really about the war conflict at all. It's about these characters, but where like the politics and machinations are real things that are happening that actually influence their lives to a degree. Like, you know, one of the things that I really like about Gundam is how it's like you have these people who are caught up in this big conflict, and as much as it's about their personal drama, that is also like shaped by the circumstances, these big circumstances they can't control and they can't fight around them.
The 1 year war is happening, whether you like it or not.
Right, exactly. And like the people who are not, even like Amuro Ray is like kind of like that. And he's like the destined kind of like hero. And he is like just one pawn in this like big conflict. And I think like that's kind of like why all of those other Gundam side stories get even more focused on even less important people who don't have like special powers or whatever.
Because we've already had, here's the chosen Amuro Ray, who will go on in every series since
into all of those
the
others.
best pilot.
Right. And so these, the Heaven Will Be Mine pilots are like, you know, their reality breaking mecha are like really crazy, but everyone who has one can do that. And that sort of beautiful dream is only really possible in space. Like, that's like the whole enduring metaphor is that like the gravity of Earth destroys that ability. Like, it holds down people from escaping its pull. And that's like why everyone has to like kind of like figure out how are we gonna live together, and how are we going to how are we going to exist as ourselves and to live together, especially when there's tension between that. And that was the long-winded answer to your question about the tie between Heaven Will Be Mine and We Know the Devil, which is that it's about like, how do we exist as ourselves? How do we exist as the unit of us together? You know, it's like negotiating that relationship between like this group of three people as like a microcosm of that is kind of like the thing.
The idyllic nature of summer camp, the same as the idyllic nature of humans in space.
Right, yeah.
Is it really good?
Yeah, there's like a kind, yeah. Is it really good? Like, what do we actually, like, how do we actually make this happen? I guess is like part of the question too, which is why I didn't want it to be so. Why I made that Heaven Will Be Mine not have like a true ending where there's like an unambiguous good ending. It's like there's like a divide or cost that happens.
Right. Which I do. One of my favorite parts about it. There is no canon answer. I love that.
Exactly.
So my next question is, you write queer characters in queer scenarios. Would you be willing to share your own journey with exploring queer ideas in writing and design?
Whoa, that's a good question. I mean, it like in some ways I have already done the easiest part. Like, you know, we know the devil is like the coming out game. So I did that, and now I'm like, oh shit, where do I go from here? So that's why I made Heaven Will Be Mine about like adults who are already like, you know, living queer lives for a while at the time that you meet them. You know, like there's hints about like their previous like this other era. Like let's call it the previous couple of seasons of Heaven Will Be Mine that you never see.
LT being a womanizer, Pluto transitioning, you know, this all happened in earlier seasons.
Right, exactly. So I've been really trying to answer that myself, actually, as I've been like working on other more like idle stories and game ideas in my spare time. I've been like trying to think about like, well, how do I really answer that question? How do I show this kind of like authentically queer experience as like among a bunch of adults, where that might not necessarily be the primary thing that it's about? Like, and I guess I try and focus on like what is the thing beyond kind of like the surface level.
Right. Writing a queer story, very much the easy answer is it's about them being queer. So how do you go past that?
How is it like about them being queer without it being about them being queer, if you know what I mean? You know, like, and so I've been thinking about like, what does it mean to write characters who are kind of like on the margins or who are always walking this kind of like precarious dance between, am I allowed, like, do I have permission from society to exist? And how is that permission conditional? Like, what do I have to do to continue existing in this sort of way? What does it mean if I like break with that and like now then have to like exist in a far more precarious sort of position in society? Those are those sorts of things. Like, you know, I'm thinking a lot about intersectional like oppressions as well, and like and particularly like socioeconomic ones. And I think like that will hopefully make the stories that I'm going to tell feel authentic. I think also like maybe just the set and setting, the sort of relationships that characters have. I've really been like advocating, like a lot of other people, for like really weird and messy relationships. I think I also, you know, want there to be really awkward and kind of chaotic relationships. I think that I'm going to continue forever to be writing stories about how people interact and what their relationships are, how they conceive of each other, how they like relate and talk to each other, and make that interaction has been really central to both like what I want to do with design and what I want to write. And that will kind of like always be queer because that's what I know. and I know like, yeah. And I know that exactly. And I know that how that intersects with straight worlds, and how that there will always be that sort of clash there. So I hope that like it's like I want to do something that may seem a lot more subtle on the surface, but will, I think, be very like unambiguously queer when read. I think you won't be able to get away from it. Or at least that's my hope.
I love it. I also love your note on intersectionalism. I love the undertone of how the people on Mars and Cradle's Graces are treated by Earthlings as just, second-class people. And not because they're queer, because they're space noids, you know.
Right, yeah.
Notes. Okay, here's an easier one, because we've had some hard ones. So, which character in Heaven Will Be Mine is your favorite, and which do you identify with the most? Because I feel those are two separate questions.
That is, well, I really don't like picking favorites among my children.
You love them all separately, all equally.
Yeah.
Okay.
even if the answer is often the one who I want to see drawn in a swimsuit most often is certainly Pluto. But for and the one that I love kicking around is Lunaterra. And the one that I like writing dialogue for the best is probably Saturn, actually.
It's great dialogue.
So like, I mean, I guess like this is something I said, I think, to when I was writing it, but like I feel like I don't when people talk about like self-insert characters, I'm like, I don't understand that, because either none of them are self-inserts or all of them are, because they are all coming kind of from me. I have a really hard time, honestly, writing a character that I don't like. And I wouldn't necessarily say that that means that like I feel like I am all of my characters, you know, but they're certainly like they're coming from parts of me, you know, and like even if I make someone who's like kind of like a disgusting asshole, I mean, like you literally don't see the face of like the biggest villain, so that's part of the way in which she does it. He kind of like is not really there, but like all of those characters have like kind of parts of me in there, and they're all characters that I create to deal with and talk about different things that are important to me. Like the other part of this is that like rather than I often see my like characters as tools because they kind of are. They're like not like characters. They're not real. You know, they're like they like yeah, I know. It's heartbreaking to realize, but they're not real.
I'm just gonna mark off this question about getting Pluto's number real quick.
Yeah, unfortunately, not gonna happen. We all wish it could be. Listen, like, look. but what I like, you know, they are. I always see kind of like the fiction as like a craft that I'm creating, and so like I talk about things. I take my own experiences and like experiences that I have that I've learned from other people. So there's parts of other people in them, but it's all like filtered through me ultimately, obviously. So
would you say that's kind of why the story comes about really unabashedly like raw and personal? Like all the characters feel so well developed and speaking from a place of a fully rationalized character, even though we do only get a 4-hour game to interact with them. Do you think a lot of that is because you see them as a piece of yourself and a tool to tell your narrative? Yeah, that actually could be part of it. Like, you know, I mean, I kind of give characters some broad notes to get them started, but like, and I like giving them history, and I also like hate writing beginnings of things. I'd rather, so like that's why I like try to start things in the middle of the action, like when things start getting interesting, and I let the reader kind of like catch up the stuff that's important. You know, when you meet people yourself as like an adult, everyone you meet has like a huge history that comes with them that you don't necessarily get the moment that you meet them, as something that you kind of learn over time. And as you learn over time, you're like, oh yeah, that's I can see like that's why the way that you are. And when you're writing a fictional character, you might like write the character behaving a certain way, and then you're like, oh, they probably are like this because of this thing that happened. And then that becomes part of their history. As I write the dialogue, I might decide, like, you know, this is kind of how I do it, is like I write the dialogue and who they are and their history and stuff is because of the dialogue that I wrote, you know? Yeah. I don't have the conception, like I have notes, I've got a lot of stuff to get myself started, but at a certain point you just start writing, and the writing is the thing itself. So they become themselves as you write them. As their voice comes out, so to say, through your writing. Right. That's what informs it. Yeah, this feels like them. I mean, there have been even times when I was like, oh, this line of dialogue should be said by this character and not this other character. Because, like, you know, I was like, oh, because they more solidly seem to be saying the sort of person who would say this other thing. So we're a mecha podcast, so let's talk about the mecha. The ship selves in Heaven Will Be Mine are very unique. That's an understatement for the three main designs. So Saturn's String of Pearls, Lunaterra's Mare Crisium, Pluto Kron Macula, I misspelled this. What are some inspirations and goals you had in the design of these three mechs? Like, how did you come up with these unique characteristics for these mechs? Well, I mean, obviously this was a very collaborative thing, but like,
I spent a long time, like, I would write down these impressions of like what they could do. I think that was like the first thing. I bought some, I took a lot of, I grabbed a lot of reference images. Like, I think like you can maybe see some bits of Wound War in Mare Crisium. It also has like, I think it was Max who decided to make it that kind of like blue color that's a little bit inspired by the goof from the original series, that dark blue.
Yep.
And I think Rex also gave it the kind of like a fencing like thing. But I like had these ideas, like as a writer, I get to be very poetic and abstract with stuff. And so like my initial like write-ups of them, I don't know if I posted them anywhere, but like I was like, well, Mare Crisium is like always wounded because like that's part of like what makes Ludoterra so cool and tragic.
Yes.
This like ever bleeding mecha. Also, it should be able to do these things. I like described elaborately like how it would fight. Because I felt like describing how it would fight would be the best for describing like the sort of personality that the mecha would have. You know, like Pluto just being this kind of like was really inspired by like mobile armor type stuff. Like it's like, oh, this is like way bigger than a mech. Oh yeah, like the Psycho Gundam actually was like a big inspiration on this one because we're like, oh, it should be bigger than everything else because that's hot. And it's also like really like and that like, you know, Pluto is really OP. Like that's her whole thing.
Yep. Yep.
Like,
we love it.
Yeah. So ways of like describing that. And like I was like, oh, these like having a mech with like a veil would be really cool. And like having it be kind of like rounded to make it a little more friendly. Like despite all of that, it's got like this kind of like motherly vibe to it, you know, like because that's kind of like another like thing that Pluto projects or people project onto her. And like I love talking about like the electrotoxin properties of like Saturn's mech. I was like, oh, this would be so cool and it would have a fight like this, even though I know that none of that stuff was gonna happen, just to kind of inform like this is what it should look like and this is what its personality should be. So I find that generally like being really, really specific about like how something should behave rather than like try and microscopically describe its look, you know, to be very specific about what it does, how it acts, how it behaves, its like overall aesthetic sense is a lot better, especially when you're describing something for an artist to draw or for somebody to imagine, actually, because it is kind of the same thing. Like, I don't want somebody getting hung up on like which joint goes into where or something like that. Like that level of detail is like not actually very important, but somebody who like just read those descriptions will probably like imagine a pretty cool looking mech. It might be completely different than somebody else's imagination of it, but that's not what I care about. Like I want you to like have this vivid idea of like this image in your head that's kind of abstract, clearly abstract of like what of how the mech would look.
So we won't be getting any like model kits. You said we wouldn't know where the joints were, so I don't know if we can really put like an existential idea of a mech into a model kit.
Yeah, I mean, like they have designs.
Yeah, so
people like somebody did like a 3D model of Mare Crisium like really early on. So like it's definitely like not gonna happen for sure. But it would be really cool to imagine as actual posable mechs.
So I'll rapid fire these last three. So we are keeping within time. So in a lot of mecha stories, secondary and support characters are pretty important to the main plot and very important to the pilots. Heaven Will Be Mine has Mercury, Mars, and Europa. Do you see them as extensions of the main three or something different?
Yeah, they were really interesting because like I wanted to do that like those chat conversations and having something to kind of like bounce off those the main characters so that you kind of like got to know the main character a little bit better outside of the context of their relationship, like like when you play a certain character's route, you have that character interacting with the other two main pilots, but then you have their like sidekick kind of like bouncing ideas off of them. So that was like actually just the easiest way to continue to develop the main three from a different angle. So that was definitely so they're definitely secondary characters. Sorry to to them. They suffer a lot for being secondary characters, having to deal with those girls.
Can you imagine? Oh my god, Saturn? Ugh.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm sorry, but also really not sorry because it was so fun putting Mercury through all of that.
Everyone. Get you a friend who checks your nudes for you is something I'm telling people now.
They're really fun to write. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed them. Like, I think minor characters are able to occupy, like, for example, Halimede, that the fandom is really obsessed with the character.
That was there at one last scene, and I'm like, I love her. I want to know more about her. She's great. Yeah. She's in like 3 like emails, and that's it.
I knew that would happen too. Like I did that basically on purpose because, like, first of all, like in the early concept art where we were just sharing like this with our friends and talking about it, multiple friends really liked her specifically because the kind of like person who's well, there's a certain dynamic between a guy who can't stop wearing masks and sunglasses and his superior that he betrays in certain ways that we kind of wanted to mirror. And I think that was just alone juicy enough. And also the fact that had already happened. So like Halimede is like, oh,
it's so good. The multiple betrayals.
Right. Yeah. From like several seasons ago is like really funny for her to show up and cause a bunch of problems.
Because why do people keep trusting Char? How does it keep happening?
Right, exactly. The problem, like, Lunaterra is kind of the answer. It's because they're too sexy.
I get it, Halimede. I get it.
And so it's really fun to, like, giving a character very little allows the audience to give them a lot. So I think people are kind of able to really like gravitate towards those characters. And because you see so little about them, you like want to know more. And this is like, I've made an observation that like people get really obsessed with the character in a dating sim that you can't date.
What?
Like, because you can't date them. And like it creates this kind of like longing that I thought was really interesting. And so yeah, so like I love those characters.
Just give me more time with Halimede. I mean, I'm ready for the spin-off game based on our side characters and Halimede. When is the dating sim coming out?
Oh God.
Do you think mechs can kiss?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what it's about, you know? Kissing is a like, you know, using your mech to fight is a metaphor for kissing that isn't really much of a metaphor at all.
Real subtle in this game.
Yeah, and it's real like I was like, well, a lot of what I like to do as a writer is like take something figurative and make it more literal. Like, oh, it's really about this. So that's why I like, you know, it's about connection or whatever. So instead of making the mechs like run on objective, you know, science or whatever like that, they run on vibes, and that allows me to get closer to the central metaphor of what it's about.
So do you think a Gundam and a Zaku can kiss?
I believe that love can bloom anywhere on the battlefield, even between a Gundam and a Zaku.
Otacon. And then this question's really much for me. Do you think we're going to see these characters again? We saw them in 2 games now in different ways. Do you think we'll see him again?
I'm going to say a pretty flat no to that for a bunch of different reasons, but I'll say like primarily just because I like conceived of both of the games as like pretty self-contained, you know? And the story that they tell is really like central to that story, you know? That's why like they're kind of like spiritual, like Heaven Will Be Mine is a spiritual sequel because like I wanted to talk about a lot of the same things, but I couldn't do that by just relitigating the previous game, you know?
The next season at summer camp.
Right, yeah.
Doesn't really have the same impact
Right.
as what we got.
Yeah, so there's some ideas I have toyed with, but including I think I probably talked about originally I wanted to make a tabletop game, and that was going to be what We Know the Devil was. So, but right now I want to work on the thing that comes after those, you know, and that's kind of I've been teaching myself to code and program, which I talked about at the beginning. I've been learning graphic design. I've been even learning music and drawing. It's all pretty bad. Actually,
you got to be bad to get good.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm kind of I'm really looking at the next thing that I do that's not part of a company is I want to make something as much by myself as I can, just to kind of see what I can do with both my strengths and my weaknesses all at once. So I think that if you are interested in the ideas and themes explored in those games, what I'm currently working on will work on them. But it'll be a thing that's it'll be just me making a weird little thing using everything I've got, no matter how good I am at it or bad, no matter how good or bad I am at it. It's going to be a whole lot of me. So I hope that people are excited about it when it finally comes out.
Yeah, that was kind of my last question, which is, you know, you're known for always kind of having a bunch of irons in the fire, and it sounds like you're really challenging yourself for the next, you know, journey on this.
Yes.
So to speak on that, where can people follow you so they can know about the greatest Aevee Bee drop to come, which is your new solo album, probably, right?
Yeah, my new solo album, coming God knows when.
Well, you're starting with coding, so game development cycle is about 6 years now. So
yeah, let's say 6 years. You might be surprised though. It might actually be very surprising, but we'll see how ugly I'm gonna let my child be. So you can find me on co-host. I'm kind of just on co-host. I'm at Mammon Machine there. I have a Twitter. I'm not checking it. Don't try and contact me through Twitter. When I have something to drop, it'll probably be on Twitter. So you can follow me there. But
for the hot takes and the great memes.
Yeah, if you want that stuff, follow me on co-host. That's where the real shit is.
Real fans know.
Real fans know co-host. I might start using Tumblr again. I'm Mammon Machine Zeal on Tumblr. Where else? You can email me. I've got a website. It's actually fine to email me. I might regret saying that, but I often enjoy emails that I get. It just reminds me that, oh yeah, people played those games and they thought they were all right.
People still play those games, oddly enough. It's like they're still out there to be playable or something.
Crazy.
Just to speak on Tumblr, will you be attending DashCon 2?
Wait, is that a thing?
Yeah, a Tumblr user who does a bunch of video essays on Tumblr is relaunching DashCon, but it's smaller and more controlled and realistic.
Oh my God. That's great. Well, I will be looking forward to seeing the post about it. There better be a ball pit.
Goddamn right, there better be a ball pit. Aevee Bee, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
And that was our interview with Aevee Bee, the co-creator of Heaven Will Be Mine. You can check her out, as she said, on co-host for many great memes and other things. For announcements of future games, follow her on co-host.
Hey, Nico here to act as, I guess, a sort of internet pallbearer in the edit. Between the time of this interview being recorded and its release, unfortunately, as many of its users know, co-host has gone read-only, and will not continue to be a social media platform people can use. But hey, it is still read-only, so if you want to go see those memes and shitposts, they are memorialized there on Aevee Bee's profile. Yet another win for the cockroach website of all time, Tumblr. I will see you all at DashCon 2.
Or you can even give her a like on or follow on Twitter, where you can follow up on her next creations. If you have any questions or any comments on this interview or our main coverage of Heaven Will Be Mine, be sure to shoot us a message on our socials, and be sure to tell Aevee Bee if you've picked up this game recently, because, hey, maybe we can give her the ol' OSG bump. That's not a thing. It's never been a thing. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next main episode. Bye!